Hello, welcome to episode 11 of the Housing Sector Podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Laura Young from Complex Asset Management Solutions. Asset management is something that I've heard a lot of throughout my career. However, a full, deep understanding I don't have, and I suspect many of us residents don't. And part of the Housing Sector Podcast and the Housing Sector website is about bridging that gap, and we can help to bridge that gap by understanding some of the shortfallings in knowledge that residents have and some of the shortfallings in understandings that housing associations might have. It might be very well for a housing association to go, we can't do this because, whereas residents, we just hear no. So by understanding some of the problems that the housing associations have to deal with, us residents can say, okay, well, maybe that's acceptable. Maybe you are expecting too much. We can perhaps work together to find a solution. Laura, who has had a huge history in housing, she has been in housing, she's been social housing herself, growing up in social housing. Her father sounds like an absolute inspiration, and I'd love to chat to him some more. So she's been in the front line, she's sold IT, she's worked in local authorities, she's been part of new builds. So she has a wealth of knowledge and has come through the sector. Now she's working with Complex Asset Management Solutions in helping housing associations better understand our homes, their assets, the stock, and how they can to best keep, maintain, and perhaps generate revenue out of these assets. Enough of me flapping my lips. Let's get on with the interview with Laura Young. Hello, Laura. Thank you very much indeed for joining me today. How are you?
Good. Wonderful. Thank you.
Good. Before we start, perhaps as a way of introduction, a little bit of background about yourself, who you are, and your background, because you've got quite a background within sort of social housing, haven't you?
Yeah, so I came across you because of a lot of the work that you've been doing on LinkedIn, and I guess it kind of resonated with some of the background I've got in housing before I even started working in housing over 20 years ago. My dad was much like you, campaigning for better quality affordable housing. We lived in a condemned PRC home that was no heating, um, poor beyond belief, single glazed windows. It was freezing. We slept in like 3 layers of clothes. So it was, not an enjoyable experience, but something we didn't really know any different. So
Yeah.
it wasn't until I was probably in my teens and he had campaigned for all of our homes to be transferred to a large scale voluntary transfer organization. And yeah, from there, you realize then what you should be living in
Yeah.
as a child, not what you had. And I don't know whether it was consciously or subconsciously. Years later, I find myself working in the sector. And yeah, for over 20 years now, my role has been somewhere in the housing sector, predominantly frontline housing, dealing with housing register allocations, temporary accommodation, and then after a few years out of the sector, working still in housing, but on the other side of the fence, implementing IT systems within local authorities and housing associations, I came back to the council to work on their new build development programme, which was, where I ended up and was really important for me because we could drive really good quality at that point. We were making decisions that were driving, good quality homes that wouldn't buy off the shelf from certain developers who were known to produce poor quality housing. So, yeah, I think for me, housing has been so fundamental as part of my life and my entire career that now I'm in a job where it's, again, different looking from an asset management perspective, but it's something that now being outside of the sector, you realize we do quite poorly inside the sector. Within housing, asset management is seen as kind of the repairs and maintenance functions. And it is, very responsive. Yes, we have periods of planned maintenance and we have planned maintenance programs, but they are driven quite often by what we can slip and how much we can push out to extend, the period of time that we have to do work. So being now outside of the sector and actually still working within the housing sector, but seeing how other sectors manage assets, you realize how much we really do have to learn in the sector and how much we can learn from other sectors that are mandated to drive their assets by using an international standard of asset management. And it's, obviously a globally driven standard that enables you to manage your assets more effectively and more efficiently. So very different. Done a lot, a lot of different things in housing, and this is one that now feels actually very timely and very important because we see so much, the highest levels of maladministration cases, high levels of fines. Organizations are paying out so much money in compensation that they could be paying in just maintaining their assets more effectively. And but it's a challenge to engage the sector and engage people to actually see the benefits in this and why they should look to align to the international standard of asset management.
Well, I agree. I've often called it out and said, why is it always this knee-jerk reaction all the time? Why aren't we planning? And when you receive sort of content that says, we expect these to go within 11 years, well, why didn't you fix it at year 10 so it didn't become a problem rather than waiting? And I think it comes down to costs, as they always say, but yet at the same time seem happy to pay fines. Just from a complete basic overview, what is asset management? In housing, let's keep it focused to housing.
Yeah, so asset management it's the process that you do to drive value from your assets. So asset and the international standard of asset management, it isn't defining how you do asset management. The international standard of asset management sets a management system standard, and it's about organizing your business so that you can translate your organizational objectives into functional plans that deliver asset management. So when we talk about the international standard, there's not a defined you do asset management this way, because obviously asset management is very different depending on whether you are an oil and gas company with a £2 billion piece of equipment in a plant room compared to a housing association who's got maybe £2 billion worth of assets over a huge geography. So the standard doesn't tell you how to do it, but it sets in place a standard, a management system that enables you to kind of look at the value of your assets. So quite often in housing, we are we're really good at putting the customer at the center of all of the decisions that we make. So we want to be customer driven and we want to be customer focused, but actually if we put the asset at the center of all of the decisions that we make, then the asset performs to the best of its ability. It's safe, it's compliant, it's reliable, it's efficient, and actually then we have a happy customer because the customer is living in an asset that is performing, is healthy, is safe, is compliant. So it is just about changing the mindset of the organization to say, actually, if we could get the best value out of the asset, then we have a really happy customer. And exactly like you've said, and it's about the data and the analysis. And this is one of the biggest problems within the sector is we are always firefighting because there's always a crisis or something that's happened that puts us always on the back foot. So we're always dealing with the latest crisis rather than thinking forward to tomorrow's opportunities. So we don't have time to really understand the data that we collect. We collect reams and reams of data within the sector, but are we using it to the best of our ability? Do we know what we're doing? So, one of the things we've been doing, so I work for an organization called Complex Asset Management Solutions, very, very small. All of the experience is predominantly outside of the sector, but want to use the experience and the knowledge to try and educate the sector to align to, a different way of thinking about asset management. So we are a small company and one of our chaps within the organisation is embedded within a housing association in the southwest, and he is doing that. He's just collecting and analysing the data, and he's telling them information that they've not known about their assets. And that can be things like, well, actually, looking at the data, all of the all of this particular asset is failing every 2 years, but you don't have a system of servicing or maintaining it. So actually, if you serviced it every 1 year, you might only see a failure then every 5 years. So it's about using the data to make decisions and drive the decisions that then will generate value from the organization.
And what's part of the thing that's generating this data? So as a resident within a home, within an asset, could I feed into this data? Could I say, boiler's got this warning light on, or I don't know, something like my immersion heater? Is it fed by the resident, or is it automated by your system?
No, I would say it's fed by the data. So you're looking at failure rates based on call outs. So you're looking at the amount of times that you're being called out for a particular component or for a particular asset within the building. So it's about understanding your data, understanding your assets, so that you can then make more business-driven decisions. And I think that probably comes back to one of the key reasons why, as a sector, we've never adopted, the international standard. And when we talk about international standards, it's not like it's not a scary concept that everybody must know, but it's ultimately there for safety. So if you think of, so this is the international standard for asset management is ISO 55001. There's an international standard for risk management. There's an international standard for quality management. There's lots of different international standards. One of them most people will have heard of is the ISOFIX, which is the international standard for fixing a car seat into a car. They're all driven by safety measures and risk and quality. So, it shouldn't be something that's seen as like a scary concept, but it's much more kind of stricter in its code of conduct. It's not about self kind of promotion. It's about betterment of stock. It's about betterment of assets and understanding that. And I think it works really well in sectors like the gas and the oil industry, where they are very profit driven. So they're looking to always drive the maximum value out of their assets. They don't want huge downtimes of their plants that then affect, their productivity. Whereas because as the housing sector, we generally aren't profit driven, we aren't then making those decisions that are kind of driven by how can we achieve the most value out of our assets? Because what we're driven by is trying to keep our customers happy all the time. And it's just, if we flip that mindset and say, well, actually, if we drive our decisions by making sure that our assets are delivering value, then the value is in having happy customers and being able to keep our customers satisfied that way.
Is there a fear that as a housing provider, by not investing in sort of by dealing with the response and the knee-jerk reaction, I'm actually saving a cost at the end of that year because my maintenance costs are low, because I haven't gone around and replaced all that failing element within that boiler? Do you think that's a legitimate concern of the providers? We'll focus on the repairs that we manage, keep that cost down, rather than spending a little bit more this year to save 3 years down the line.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. I also think there's an element of lack of resources. So, an organization could have a really clear planned maintenance program that this year we're going to replace 400 roofs over the year and we're going to replace 600 kitchens. But then there's an element of, is the resources there to do that? Or are our resources being pulled onto reactive work because reactive problems are taking precedent? Or actually, budget wise, yes, there's so many reactive problems. Maybe we need to take some out of the planned maintenance budget to fix the reactive, the problems that are occurring that we hadn't planned for. So I think there's an element of that. And that's, not saying there are so many organizations where this is managed really well, and they do have a really good planned maintenance program, really good organizations that will have, a good mix or a good balance of reactive versus planned. But there is a general knowledge and consensus across the board that actually, more often than not, more money is being spent on responsive repairs. And I think, COVID has maybe played a part in this, where it created huge backlogs, and obviously costs soared. But the backlogs have then created more problems, because when things aren't being fixed, or they're being fixed quickly, they aren't then being fixed properly.
Yeah.
And the idea of asset management is about, actually, it's root cause analysis. Rather than going back and fixing this multiple times, let's invest in this properly in the first place. And so asset management is very much focused on the whole life cost of your asset. So you can use asset management from the point of making decisions about how you build your assets. And where I worked prior, when we were looking at our development program, we were analysing the whole life cost of building a modular construction home versus the whole life cost of building a traditional built, brick built home. And on paper, the traditional built home will always come out cheaper in terms of build costs. But when you run a whole life cycle analysis, looking at your data and the costs associated with the long-term maintenance, having built something, in a factory with quality control measures, you could evidence that actually your repairs costs and your long-term maintenance costs will be cheaper over time. So when we look at asset management, it's looking at trying to make decisions that are focusing on the whole life cost of the decisions and the assets and the work that you're doing, rather than just the upfront costs, because sometimes it's worth investing a little bit more at the beginning to get better quality, for the life of that particular asset.
Is this why we're seeing a lot of new construction, and there are sort of timber frame buildings, less conventional construction habits starting to form, which are being promoted? Do you think that is they're now focusing on the new and getting rid of a lot of this dilapidated stock that just can't be fixed? So do you think we're turning the corner? Do you think we are now investing in more longer term, cost effective buildings?
Possibly, or the drive is speed. So it's making sure that we're making the right decisions in terms of the cost, because actually, if our decisions are being driven purely by speed, then they aren't necessarily being driven by quality. But there is, we've got so much of our housing stock is considered to be old and in need of retrofit. We can't just get rid of all of that. We would never be able to build in the rate that we need to replace all of that stock that we own. So we have to find ways to retrofit that stock and to manage it effectively. But it's about making decisions that take the whole life cost and look at more than just the asset. And one of the pieces of work that Oscar, who works for us, is doing with the Housing Association is trying to understand the impact of putting the wrong asset into a particular type. So it's understanding, if you've got a particular construction type, it may not work with an air source heat pump. So taking a standard approach that as a business we're going to be done with all of our boilers and we're going to just implement air source heat pumps in all of our new homes or in all of our homes as part of a retrofit program, that won't always work with every construction type. And it's using the data and the analysis to drive decision making in a much more informed way than just saying, well, this is what our blanket policy is and this is how we will approach it. But I think the asset management process and the international standard is about driving kind of alignment within the organization as well, so that your decisions that you're making are actually driven by your organizational objectives. So if you've got, as a business, 4 organizational objectives within the asset management world, you create then your policy, which says, these are my commitments, these are my statements, this is how I'm going to manage my assets. And all of those policy statements, they have to link back to the organizational objectives so that you're always, whatever your priorities are, whatever you're working on, it links back to your objectives so that you aren't, doing all of these different things that don't go back to your original objectives as an organization. And it's about that kind of alignment process. You start at the top with your objectives, you build your commitments as an organization to your assets, and then you build your strategies and your objectives for how you're going to deliver that. So it creates almost, a document that sets out all of your promises and your strategies, and then your objectives, and then your strategies to deliver those objectives, and then the detail that around the kind of plans that sits outside how you're going to actually manage your maintenance program. That all sits outside, but the document in itself, which is called a strategic asset management plan, that's where you create your work. That's your 3 year, 4, 5 years worth of work, because you've got your objectives, and this is how we're going to deliver those objectives. And most organizations will have an asset management strategy, but most of them won't be to the detail and the information that you would see if you were aligning with the international standard of asset management. And I think probably some people think that it's costly or it's going to be expensive, and maybe that's what puts people off or thinking about aligning with the standard. But it doesn't have to be expensive, because it's not, you don't have to buy a brand new IT system. This is about just changing the culture within an organization to be more focused around the asset management activities.
How much insight and data and intelligence about assets do you think the average housing provider currently has?
I would say probably 50% of the organizations have the right data, but don't necessarily have the knowledge to kind of implement that knowledge, that data, in a way that is useful. So you might have, and we collect vast amount of data through things like our stock condition surveys. But do we need all of that data, or are we just collecting this sort of superfluous amount of information because once upon a time an organization or the government said you need to have the stock condition survey, a standard has been created by somebody, and we now then just regurgitate that every year? Actually, the most important data is the data that we're driving on a daily basis, is the data that's coming in through the call center. It's the data that's coming in from our repairs and maintenance. It's the data from our operatives that are saying to us, we've repaired this particular component 5 times in the last year, and it's not actually improving. So yeah. I believe that the data is there, but the problem we have in most cases is we don't have the analysis in the organization or the competence to analyze that data in a very strategic way, to drive decisions and to drive information up to make those decisions. So, and there are, I'm not saying that there are organizations that don't do this. There will be organizations that do this, but they're rare. And I think if the organizations could structure their way, themselves in a slightly different way, I do think that they could use that data more efficiently, and actually looking at what other organizations outside of the sector do really well, because it's okay to learn. And I think we get very little cross-sector knowledge coming in, because we do tend to have a lot of organizations, or a lot of our staff move between organizations. So all we're doing is we're taking knowledge from other housing providers and using that. But actually, in the occasions where we've seen people come from outside of the sector, where we've seen people come from, completely different sectors, retail or health or NHS, or, wherever they've come from, they'll bring a slightly different understanding about what an asset means to them, or what customer means to them, or so it's it's a challenge. I think for us, our biggest driver is we want to educate the sector on what asset management really is. It isn't just your basic repairs and maintenance. It's much bigger and it's much broader than that. And actually, your whole organization should be driven by simple asset management principles or commitments. And everybody in your organization should be able to know what they are, whether they work in finance or whether they work in your spares store. Everybody should know and understand what the driver is in terms of the assets.
So if I was a housing provider and I've got, let's say, 10,000 homes in a nice geographical area, and I say to you, okay, what are you going to do? Come on in. What sort of week one, month one, what would you do? How would you embed yourself and what would you be looking for and what outputs would you expect?
I think the first thing for if we were to come into an organization, one of the first things we would do would be a gap assessment, and it then looks at the asset management maturity of an organization. So it will go through a series of questions that are defined as part of the international standard of asset management through the Institute of Asset Management, and it will define what that kind of maturity is within the organization. And you would speak to as many people as you can throughout the organization to understand what the maturity looks like from top management right through to the operatives on the ground, finance, HR. So you're trying to really get a picture of that. And from that, you can create then a series, series of objectives or strategies for that organization to improve their maturity. Now, if an organization wanted to align to or adopt or become certified to the international standard of asset management, then that requires an audit process to actually formally audit their files and their structure and their own internal audit process, and that will give them then the kind of certificate on the wall. Now, we're not saying that everybody needs the certificate on the wall. What we're saying is that actually, if you just understood the basic principles and aligned to the international standard of asset management, it will create so many benefits for your organization in terms of collaboration. So, one of the huge problems that we see within the sector is they're very siloed. So you've got development making decisions about development opportunities, you've got asset management making decisions, or you've got your repairs and maintenance team making decisions, you've got finance making decisions, but those decisions aren't necessarily joined up. So if you're in the development team and you decide, oh, we're going to go and build these, procure these new homes that are all built from shipping containers, and they'll be built in the next 12 weeks, and it'll be fantastic because we'll get them on site and it'll be great. What we've not done is necessarily spoken to the people who will be responsible for maintaining those. And what this structure of asset management can do is it breaks down those barriers so that people are involved in all of the aspects of asset management and the decisions are being made together. You're not doing that independently. So, and it creates so many more benefits in terms of as we've said, the value of the assets. You're using understanding the value of the asset so that you can then make decisions that drive better value, which drive better performance, which drives, lower risk. So it's really difficult to explain all of that to the organizations when you've got a 1 minute elevator pitch to explain the benefits, and all we can do at the moment is the work we're doing with the housing associations we're working with is just being able to use their experience and their knowledge, and I do believe that these organizations will be held up in 2, 3, 4 years time when this is embedded and settled as beacon authorities that everybody will be looking to say, well, how have you managed to do what you're doing and have such high satisfaction and low levels of complaints, and that's where we want to be and that's what we want to achieve. But it's not an easy kind of thing to get your head around because it's not a simple fix where somebody can come in and just replace an IT system and say, there you go, everything's going to be fine and dandy now. it's time. It takes time to really change the culture of the organization to be much more kind of evidence-based decision
Yeah.
making. And that's obviously another thing that we can do and we will do is to really try to understand the data within an organization and use that data to help drive and make informed decisions. But yeah.
With data, and my fear is with mergers, there's different data silos. We've got CRM over here. We use this one. Property maintenance use this one. We've got an Excel spreadsheet that we've used for years over here. It is all separated, and bringing in that, because you're not bringing in a bit of IT that sits on top and pulls it all together. So it is a
No.
cultural thing. But do you think that part of the culture, if I'm a housing provider that's perhaps failing, I don't want to know the state of my assets? Is that an element of concern?
I think, yeah, with I don't want to think that that's the case within housing associations. Having worked in an organization, I genuinely believe that the people that are there want to see good quality housing. They want
Yeah.
their customers to be happy. They want um, to drive better business decisions. But sometimes you can be so ingrained in an organization that you can't see that
Mm.
what you're doing isn't for the benefit of the customer anymore. It's maybe being driven by other objectives and other decisions. Um, and I do think that probably a number of the people that we've tried to reach out to or that we've spoken to or tried to explain this process to are, well, we know what we're doing. We've done this for years. We don't need to be told because this is bread and butter to us. We've always managed assets and this is what it is. But actually managing assets is one thing, asset management is another. So managing assets is really just the care of the asset. Asset management it's a structure, it's a system, and that's what people don't really want to do. And it is, it would be an upheaval. It's a lot to change a culture of an organization, and that has to be driven by the top. You can
Yeah.
change that culture by a middle manager saying, oh, by the way, everybody, we're going to implement a new structure of asset management that looks at all of these different things. It has to be driven by the top because it's top down and bottom up. It's got to be driven by the top, but the bottom have
Mm.
got to really buy into what it is you're trying to achieve.
Never underestimate the value of a fresh pair of eyes. I always
Yeah,
think that's the big learning. Someone comes in and goes, "Why don't you do this way?" Oh, I never thought of that. We've never done it that way before. It's that
yeah,
fresh approach that's needed. Look, we're fast running out of time. If someone wants to get in contact with you and wants to have a discussion about this, you're happy for me to provide your email address and contact
yeah,
details,
yeah, no
and
problem.
they can reach out to you via email.
Yes, yeah, email. Yeah, you can share that on the screen and or to anybody. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well. So if anybody wants to
I'll
connect
make sure
on
that's
there,
there. And a final thing for the residents. So, as a resident, as quick as concise as you can be, as a resident, if my housing provider has taken on board your advice and has started to look at their assets in a more constructive way, what's the benefit for me?
I'd like to say that you will be part of an organization who truly understands what the value of the asset is,
Yeah.
which will then in turn give you the best possible home that performs, that is efficient, that is reliable, that lasts a long time, and will be beautiful to live in.
Well, what a lovely note to end on. I implore anyone to please reach out to Laura for a conversation. That's what it is, to have a conversation and take some of these insights. Thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been lovely talking to you. Let's catch up again in a few months' time and see how things are going.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much
All the
indeed.
best. Thanks, Ben. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much indeed, Laura. We all now have a better understanding of asset management. Her email address has been on top of the screen throughout the interview. I will now put it up here so you can email her direct if you have any questions about asset management or would like to find out more. You can also visit the website for complex asset management solutions. Or failing that, you can email me, ben@housingsector.co.uk. Look, that's it for episode 11. We've got some more interviews coming up. Very excited about these. Really enjoyed the interview, Faith. This is a way of learning, really bridge that gap. That's what the housing sector website and the podcast is about. Bridging that gap between provider and resident. Here we are, all in it together, and we really are. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for listening to the Housing Sector Podcast. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends and colleagues. Your support helps us continue to bring you the latest updates and discussions on housing issues. Stay tuned for our next episode, and don't forget to follow us on our social media sites for more content and updates.